This book is my second published book and also my second genre. So I wrote a crime novel and an apocalyptic novel. Apocalyptic novel is an interesting experience. I think everyone should try it. You sort of spend time alone, sort of imagining sort of worst case scenarios, sort of decline of civilization, the loss of the sort of order that as we know it, and then you go for a walk and everything is absolutely fine. It's kind of liberating, makes you kind of appreciate things, so I wanted to read this it's a quote from William Faulkner that, from his Nobel Prize speech that actually speaks about the apocalypse, strangely enough, so to speak, where he says, I decline to accept the end of man. It is easy enough to say that man is immortal simply because he will endure, that when the last ding-dong of doom has clanged and faded from the last wordless rock hanging tideless in the last red and dying evening, that even then there will be one more sound, that of his puny, inexhaustible voice still talking. I refuse to accept this. I believe that man will not merely endure, he will prevail. He is immortal, not because he alone among creatures has an inexhaustible voice, but because he has a soul, a spirit capable of compassion and sacrifice and endurance. The poet's, the writer's duty is to write about these things. It is his privilege to help man endure by lifting his heart, by reminding him of the courage and honor and hope and pride and compassion and pity and sacrifice which have been the glory of his past. The poet's voice need not merely be a record of man, it can be one of the props, the pillars, to help him endure and prevail. This notion, I think, is important. I wanted to read as there's a conception of apocalyptic books as being incredibly pessimistic, understandably so, right? It's kind of envisioning the end of our societies, right? But I see the genre as a way of illuminating the values that remain on the other side of things. It's about the things that endure, and New Day is about the endurance of the love between the main character and his daughter. That parental bond is essentially the fuel that enables them both to survive. It gives him meaning to live, and it enables her physically to sustain life. So I don't see it as a nihilistic exercise. I don't see myself as a pessimist. I think nihilism is a sort of lazy kind of exercise, where you say all is bleak. Well, sure, there's bleakness. We're all going to die. There's a news flash, but it's true. But there's a but there, right? There's a tremendous amount of life in between. And I think a good apocalyptic novel, it challenges our notions of ourselves, that in a sense we only really know who we are by the context of our society, of our infrastructures. I think we all itch, right? Who would we be without this? Like, we've grown, we've been shaped to a very particular and specific world that's specific to our time. Who would we be if we shaped to an alternate reality? I think it's a good exercise in the hypothetical. It's the kinds of decisions, right? Will we make in the crucial hour? Will we make the moral decision or the practical decision? What choice indeed serves the most good? Is idealism more valuable than survival? Is survival a moral imperative in and of itself? So when the pillars of society are stripped away and all that's left is the enduring human spirit, sure, there will be the savagery and ignorance. It's constant throughout human history, but also the love, the honor, sacrifice, and the soul. I thought I'd start with a title chapter called Bensonhurst, in honor of reading here in Brooklyn. So this, you need a very little bit of context from the book. The father's name is Nostradamus, his daughter is Naomi, and they've just left their home because it became uninhabitable, and he's going to visit to seek the whereabouts of his father, who he was already estranged from. And he has a bike. He stole a bike from some guys who tried to kill him. The bike gets about 115 miles per hour on the BQE, another waste of gas. He could take the streets and spare fuel and let the wheels roll downhill, but marauders stalk the streets and probably won't bother with the highway. Plus, he wants to get this whole ordeal over with. He never bothered counting the years since he last had contact with his father. Since Black Sun, he'd consider it now and then, but never wanted to leave the brownstone and never had wheels. Now he's plumb out of options. He'll take the family he can barely trust over strangers he can't trust at all. Bay Ridge is a ghost town, like Clinton Hill, like all of Brooklyn. Plastic bags drift and sing in the wind. Irish pubs and Italian restaurants are hollow beneath old-timey signs. Brownstones have wood boards covering their windows. While boarded-up homes used to be a sign of abandonment, they now indicate life. Someone is or has been holding out inside those buildings. Nos rolls up to Patty's Pub, infamous dive bar of retired Sergeant Benny Greene. Bar stools are scattered and the windows are cracked, and there's not a trace of liquor anywhere, but shattered glass on the floor. Grime and soot cover everything, the walls of black and white photos of Benny Greene, the blue-eyed, sandy-haired old bull with celebs, police chiefs, politicians, Mayor Kelly, Frank Sinatra Jr., and Marty Markowitz. The bike wheels crack against the caked filth and he dismounts by the staircase. He sets Nay down on the floor and she stomps to get her blood going. The stairs lead up to a bolted door. Nos pounds on it. Naomi jumps. He sits on the dirty steps and waits. His and Naomi's footprints are fresh in the dust over old footprints. Nos remembers his own adolescent feet, running bags of ice, cases of beer and wine, and mop buckets and old worn-to-hell busboy shoes. Nos pounds again and again on that door, now a grown man, and yet still shut out of that home he was never allowed inside in the first place. He remembers the years of working at Patty's and wanting to get inside that door, always shut out by the woman who demanded her husband not, under any circumstances, have any past whatsoever, as though his father had miraculously sprung out as a fully formed adult for the pleasure of their marriage. Bridie would not look at Nos as she came and went and drank at the bar. Nos hated her so much he would not even admit in conversation that Ben was indeed his dad, causing a ton of confusion in the old neighborhood. Yet he wanted in that door as a kid, as an adolescent, and now as a father himself. How little has changed. But what little has changed now clings to his leg with tiny hands. Tired? Asks Nos. Yeah, Nay says in a small voice. Why are we here? To see your granddaddy. He's not around anymore. Not your mother's dad, my dad. You have a dad? Everyone has a dad. She looks at him like she's not sure, but she'll go with it if he says so. Nos nods, some more than others, he concedes. In Nos's teenage years, he would imagine what his father's house looked like inside the door, a castle-like interior with red carpeted staircase spiraling in the center, and Ben's young son, Tommy Greene, sliding down the railing, diving into his Christmas presents. The kid sitting cross-legged and opening gift after gift under the red and yellow lit tree, big as the one in Rockefeller Center, his cheeks glowing, his mother and father smiling with their cheeks glowing. Nos could never watch Christmas movies. After a while of pounding on that door and feeling like he'd gotten absolutely nowhere in life after 25 some odd years, he pulls his 6-hour out and tells Nay to cover her ears, pounds around it to each lock, and goes so ceremoniously inside. Oh, that's Brooklyn. All right, so the next piece I'll read from is the father and daughter are forced to go to Manhattan. Manhattan is, in this apocalyptic future, this is the center, this is where the bomb actually went off. So this is the sort of first encounter of the city. Nos and Naomi pass fly-ridden bodies along the shoulder. Their faces are seared and hard, some with mouths or eyes missing. Father and daughter look away and see the Manhattan skyline abridged. Nos thinks the skyline looks like a king's crown. Skyscrapers line the outer rim, but nothing stands within. The tallest of buildings are reduced to rough nubs standing in piles of rubble. A rain cloud of debris hovers. The island extends into the north beyond sight as New York City rots in its deathbed. They ride on with reluctance. The bridge is bumpy from the wrinkled road. The light darkens as they enter the concrete swamp. There's no sign of life, though it's sure to be lurking. They ride the FDR around the bottom of Manhattan. The East River now eats at the edge of the highway, and Nos can see the dampness where the tide has reached the city proper. The Battery Park tunnel is collapsed, no telling whether the blast or the water is responsible. He turns and drives the bike through the streets. The financial district is quiet. Weeds had sprouted from cracks in the sidewalks. He hears a scuttle of rodents and the flutter of wings and the plop of water. As they get closer to the river above the subway, the foliage thickens. The street is cratered even worse in Manhattan than in Brooklyn, and the water runs almost 2 feet deep. They reach the area affected by the blast from the nuke. People called the bomb the Big Apple. Nos and Naomi pass where a sidewalk curls upward like a pitch tent from the vacuum of pressure. A drain pipe juts up from underground. The iron girders of old buildings are stripped bare and twisted and covered in bird shit. As they cross Astor Place, he sees the motion of that hellish wave as it tore its way through the city. Every building is destroyed, towers crushed into dust. The rubble has sat still for long enough for a coat of brownish-green growth. Vines crawl in and out of window frames and wrap around exposed beams. Nos is surprised at how quickly nature works. Only a year and greenery has already rooted the mulch of the Empire City. So soft is truly stronger than hard. He cannot get used to the open sky. This is New York City, referred to as simply the city by anyone like him who grew up in Manhattan, Queens, Staten Island, or the Bronx. Towers are supposed to be everywhere. You should only see a narrow zigzag of the sky when you look up. When he would visit as a kid, he would try to find the stars at night, and he never could. The skyscrapers wouldn't let him. He feels the tallest buildings tower over him like an amputee might still feel their lost limb. He thinks the skyscrapers are there, and then he stops and looks, and they're gone. The only buildings still standing are at the very edge of the blast. He sees some way uptown, maybe as far as Harlem. If the remains of the skyline is a king's crown, he thinks they're standing on the head of the king. He looks around and chuckles. If Manhattan is a crown, then the king is a corpse. Long live the king. Nos remembers the weeks following the blast where day would break with no light and the black rain drenched the city as far as Fort Greene like tears through mascara. He watched through his scope from his roof as the dehydrated people drank the radiation poison that would kill them within days. Then he and Nae began wearing masks. He began drinking again, all the booze Yvette had allowed in the house that past year gone before the first week was over. That was around when he and Nae had the talk. Mommy's not coming home. Where is she? Nos choked like a peach pit had lodged in his throat. Naomi, on the other hand, was just fine. She was curious and alert. A better place. There must have been tears in his eyes because she now looked at him harder, still curious but scared too, because Pa never cried. She hadn't yet made the connection with her mom. You okay? She quizzed. Yes, sweetheart, you'll be okay too, he said, even as he realized she still didn't know why she shouldn't be. Okay. Mommy's not coming home. Neither is Jay or Mikey. Where are they? They're dead, sweetie. She glanced down to the left, searching herself now. Like Lucky? Lucky the parakeet. Like Lucky, but they're still with us. They watch us every day. They love us every day. I miss Mommy. Me too. And Joaquin and Mikey. I don't really miss them. Maybe Mikey. Jay pinches and tickles me, but I do miss Mommy. You'll miss them all someday. When will I see them? Nos sucked at the air, seemingly insufficient for his lungs. His pulse was off the charts. When you die. When will I die? Never, sweetie, as long as I live. All right, so the book also has some sections that are from the perspective of the 6-year-old Naomi. So I'm going to jump now to a part where all you really need to know is her father is deathly ill. And she is in a van basically left to fend for herself. They are inside the van now, her paw lying in her lap beside the motorcycle. She strokes his head the way he would and in her forgotten bedroom. He turns and cries and sweats. His head is soaked and so is her lap. Everything is dark, so she only feels his squirming, shivering body, and she is so scared, but she cannot be. He needs her now. She has to forget that she's scared like he told her to, but every time she forgets, she remembers again, so she forgets again and remembers, forgets and remembers, and wishes she were strong like him. It's dark in the van and dark beyond the windows. She hears something rummage outside the van, heavy breathing. The sound seems to be coming from everywhere. She looks from one window to the next, but can't see anything. Something hard scrapes on the outside of the van, and for a moment, all she can hear is her own heartbeat going so fast it shakes her chest. A tap, tap, tap hits a window, and heavy breath fogs the glass in the moonlight. 3 dark round circles of paw prints suddenly smack against the dusty window. A desperate black nose presses hot holes in the fog and snips loud like a vacuum. Then the nose and the paws vanish. Naomi sits still and holds her pa's head lighter now as he turns and shakes, his eyes open now but still blind. He doesn't see her, but something horrible that scares him. He isn't supposed to be scared. A thump jumps on the hood of the van and nails flick and scrape against the front windshield. She looks to the back doors. They are open a crack. She knows she should shut them, but she doesn't want to leave Pa. Suddenly, the sound of another sniff noses into the van through the cracked door, and she screams. She hears noses everywhere. The dog's carnal face looks inside with yellow hunger. Forget that you're scared. Forget it. Forget it. No, she barks at the dog. No, no, no. The dog's brow crinkles in doubt as he glances away from the girl. Naomi slides Nose's head from her lap and her head to the side and presses against the roof of the van. No, she yells again, stomping forward, and the dog slowly, unsurely slinks back away and disappears into the dark, and she pulls the door tight to her with a slam and locks it. Nay remembers what the crazy man said, make sure you eat something. Her pa didn't eat all night, maybe that's why he's so sick. Nay takes the can of beans and puts a spoonful up to her pop's mouth. He is lying still now, and his mouth won't open, so she pulls his mouth by her lower lip and slides the beads in. Only he won't chew, and the beans just lay there and some fall down his face. She moves his jaw for him, hoping he will begin to chew, but he can't. The juice from the beans slides down his throat, but he won't chew. Nay takes a spoonful into her own mouth and chews it, but instead of swallowing, she puts her mouth up to her father's and fills him with the mushy chewed beans. She watches his throat as it dips like he's swallowing, and he breathes, and then so does she. All right, so this last bit is in the second part of the book where they've actually gotten out of New York and they're in Philadelphia. So Nos finds a garage that looks like it's sort of welcoming to people. So I think that's pretty much all you need to know. Nos knocks on the garage door beside the Rice $10 sign. A voice calls from a second-story window. Yes? Looking for food, Nos calls. Got money? Asks the voice from on high. Nos holds out a fold of 20s, though he can only guess what paper money is really worth these days. Probably different for everyone, depending on what they need. The garage slowly cranks open. The ground floor is a wide-open workshop with tools scattered about. A generator hums and several drum cans burn fire slow beneath various pots. A Suburban with its hood open stands in the corner. An enormous pale man is bent to the engine with his cracks smiling at his guests. A stairway climbs to the second level where they sleep and shower, and a large crucifix dangles from the ceiling. A gangly teen sits on the second level by the window, holding a rifle. He nods to the larger man. The pale man turns and wipes the grease from his fingers with the stained rag on his shoulder. His hair and cheeks are red, and his white tank top is sweated through. There's a gap in his teeth of his welcoming grin. McGinnis, he says, offering his hand. Nos takes it, workman's hand, nails short and dirty, stout palm, good shake. Nos Greene, this is Naomi. Nos, huh? Pleased to meet you. Hungry? You guessed it. Well, we don't got no stew today, but there's some good clean water and rice as always, and we got some beans. Sounds perfect. Nos chats up McGinnis for a bit, tell him how things are in New York and hearing rumor of the rest of the country. Haven't moved about much, McGinnis says, just working here in this garage. I was a mechanic, so I just keep doing what I do. People come through here? Some, mostly local. Safe enough? Not even sure what that means anymore. The minute you start thinking it's safe is when it ain't. You got that right. Nos nods and looks about the garage. He sees a first aid kit with a red cross. There was a supply drop in Central Park, Nos tells the mechanic, inoculations and such. Yup, there's a setup just like that in Lincoln Field. Got my shot months ago, been holding up ever since. On the second floor, there's a makeshift shower heated by a barrel below. McGinnis offers a shower and a night's sleep for a few more dollars. Others come. A group of 3 pale, tatted up men with thin lips and hard, stupid mouths. They talk to each other like a backward family where everyone thinks everyone else is dumber than they are. In this case, they're all correct. They barely acknowledge Nos and Nay, and when they do, they sneer and mutter to one another. Their daddy comes, a heavy-set gray man with gray skin like ash and tatted sleeves. They huddle on the opposite side of the garage as McGinnis gets back to work. The garage door cranks open and lets in the sunlight, outlined by a tall silhouette and 3 dogs. The door closes and Nos sees a woman in the garage light, hood pulled over her head, mouth almost smirking. 3 long leather dog leashes are wrapped around her extended wrist, and the dogs pull forward with hulking, muscular shoulders and powerful jaws, well-fed, purebred, red-nosed pit bulls. When she sits and drops the 3 leashes, the dogs sit as well, sturdy and alert. The family twitches at her entrance like she and the dogs are a puzzle to be solved. The curious fact that she managed to keep 3 100-pound dogs well-fed while able-bodied men starved. The family's dumb eyes rake her like a pinup. One of the boys offers a hello and 2 dogs snarl and growl where they sit. Easy killer, she says. That's some beast you got there, the boy says, and his cheeks go red. I advise a muzzle. I advise the same, she replies. Nos stands and the 3 dogs turn to him. They sniff, and the one dog who didn't growl before growls now, but the other 2 wag their tails and open their mouths and show their teeth like a smile. The third has a different growl than the others. It's warmer and almost a whine. Strange, says the woman. She eats her bowl of rice, and the 4 men head out and call to her and snicker. After a few minutes, she removes her hood. Her skin is like dusk. She looks young, as though she hit 22 and never aged a day. She turns to Nos. Her head is held high, her chin pointed at him before it lowers, and she stares, squinting to read him. A scar slices down the break of her cheek. Nice coat, she says. His navy trench coat is filthy. Thanks. She is smiling crooked to the other side. The smile is like a soft left jab. It's alive. And paradoxically, it gives the impression she would wear it both to and in the grave. I was being sarcastic, she says. The tail of a tattoo creeps up her neck the way Naomi's rash is beginning to shape. Her breasts are strapped down, though irrepressible, pulling her camo shirt away from her stomach, and in between, her heart seems to be visibly pulsing, as though hers beats closer to the surface than other people. Beautiful, says Nos. Save it. I meant the dogs, he says. She smiles, pauses, and laughs. Got me. What are their names? Killer, Face, and Ghost. Are you serious? She nods. Ghostface Killer? My ex-boyfriend was a Wu-Tang fanatic. He was an idiot. And you? I'm not an idiot. I meant your name. Layla. You? This is Naomi. I'm Nos, he says. She raises an eyebrow. Nos? What kind of name is that? Nostradamus, he says, reminding him of all the times he's fielded questions about his name in more social days. Are you serious? I am. Were your parents conspiracy nuts? No. My mother has a family tradition. When a baby is born, the youngest child gets to name it. My sister, she was 4, saw something about Nostradamus on TV, and just liked the name. I thought nosotros, Spanish for we. He looks at Nay. Yeah, we, what my wife used to say. quite. Naomi takes up about, I'd say, 15 to 20% of the book. So it's mainly, it's a close third person, mainly through Nos' perspective, and Naomi sort of pops in here and there. Well, I wanted them to be separated at times in the book, so I knew I needed her as a point of view to tell the reader things that you wouldn't be able to see if she wasn't with Nos. So, like the scene that I read, the hero is completely incapacitated. So you need her perspective for that. But yeah, I also think I really like the contrast of, you know, this very brutal apocalyptic world, and there's still, you know, a 6-year-old girl trying to assimilate life the same way 6-year-old people do now. This one was a little harder because you're responsible for so much of the world, right? If you're reading a contemporary crime novel or anything that takes place in the real world, the reader is not wondering, like, wait, has Philadelphia been reduced to rubble by a bomb or not? The reader just assumes that Philadelphia exists, right? So there's, so questions start to come up, and you have to know more. I found like I had to teach myself more about just things. You know, writing a crime novel, I had to learn about, like, criminals and stuff. But like with creating a whole world, you have to learn about how would people feed themselves, right? Some of the science of the medicine. So yeah, it's definitely more challenging. But the world building is fun. I recommend designing an alternate universe for all of you. Well, the first place, and my primary influence was was a Magna series called The Lone Wolf and Cub, that was also made into some great films. And it takes place, it's a samurai movie, it takes place in stories, it takes place in like 16th century Japan or so. And it was just the rolling wastelands of it, and it's this guy, this sort of killer, pushing a baby cart, right? He's this tiny child. And the juxtaposition of that to me was so powerful. And they tried to remake it a few times. Road to Perdition, if anyone saw that movie, was an American attempt to remake Lone Wolf and Cub. But it's that paradox, right? The killer father, right? Like a guy with a gun is just a guy with a gun, but a guy with a gun with a daughter at his back is a hero. In terms of the sort of world building, I deliberately didn't read any apocalyptic literature when I was writing the first draft. But a big influence was Blood Meridian, was Cormac McCarthy's book. Because it's funny, he wrote an apocalyptic book, but Blood Meridian feels way more like the end of the world than his actual apocalypse, and the sort of neo-biblical style that made you feel like, crawling under your covers. So what Wendy's referring to is this book. I was actually hired to write this book. A gentleman by the name of James Fry was running a book packaging and film production company, I guess you call it. It's a very nebulous thing. There's nothing else like it that I'm aware of. So he had this idea, post-apocalyptic story, father, daughter, the name Nostradamus Greene, and he was looking for a writer. He read some of my work. He was like, "You could write this." So I said, "Yeah, sure." I didn't have any great ideas at the time, it kind of opened up a whole new world when you get to play with reality. It changes kind of the way you relate to writing and literature. So yeah, I'm at work at a sequel. It looks like things are picking up with the book. So this is going to turn into a whole world. America's in a civil war. There's religious fanatics have sort of staged a coup in the military, and so what's left of the sort of more secular military is trying to organize and prop up what's left of the government, and they're trying to find a cure for the disease. So all these things are going on, most likely a trilogy, maybe more, I don't know. And But yeah, I stuck with the genre. I really, I have another book that's a dystopian. It's not an apocalyptic, but it's dystopian. It's about a sort of obsessively voyeuristic society that watches each other on devices all the time. Sound familiar? There's a sort of, just to keep on with my, twisted things that I do in my books, there's this live, there's a site called Crap Shot where people like place bets on people getting murdered, and you get to watch them real time and see if you guessed the right time. So it's, yeah. I'm also writing a children's fantasy novel, so get tired of the dark stuff, you really do. The main thing it affects is my reading, and in general, the things I'm writing have a tremendous effect on the things that I read. Because the education that you need, genre educations that you need are, really in depth to be able to assuredly handle and step into a genre and say, like, I know what I'm doing, right? So, I said at first I didn't read any dystopian. With the first draft, I did not. I read a lot of fantasy, because fantasy has tons of world building. Really what I was looking for was elements of a world that I would like, right? I wasn't really thinking what's going to happen when the world ends. I was thinking what kind of like story and world do I want to build, and what would be interesting to read. I don't know what will happen to the world end. I don't think the apocalypse is coming. I'm not a survivalist. I don't have a bunker. Sometimes I wish I did, but like it's not me. I can't force it, right? So I read fantasy. I actually read a lot of military nonfiction, because I began to think that these were the only guys who were actually equipped. The survivalists will, I don't know, maybe they'll be okay, but the military will actually survive the apocalypse. When I switched to fantasy, everything changed. I started working on this fantasy book, and it was, everything I read they were all English writers, first of all, because you can't read Americans and then write fantasy. It's hard. It's hard, because their language is all wrong, right? The approach to language didn't exist in this fictional time that you're writing in. So yeah, it takes over your life. My wife could probably tell you more about how the books I write take over my life. I don't know. Yeah, actually, I was able to stick to my original plan, but the problem was my original plan wasn't good enough. So it was more, the issue was the rewrites brought out other elements of the book, because I was very stripped down and simple in the concept. I just saw this bleak landscape and this father and this daughter sort of, somewhat romantically, like silhouettes, like walking and surviving. So there's a lot more that, it was a very strange process the way this book worked, because I would get an idea, develop it, and I'd have a draft, right? And then I'd give it to James, and he would say, fix it. So I'd go fix it, and then, it would look good, I wouldn't hear anything about it, and then he would have some kind of meeting that he would think he had a deal lined up for the book. He's like, I need it now, I need it in 2 weeks. And have been working on something else. So I would have this, there was like a gun to my head, I'd have 2 weeks to produce a draft, and then nothing happened with it, and then the same exact thing happened again, and then even when it became published, I was on a deadline, so it was a very hurry up and wait kind of experience. It would be sort of, sitting around, dealing with drafts, thinking things through, getting ideas, and then all of a sudden I had to get a draft ready in like a matter of months. So deadlines help. There was some copy editing mistakes that made it, and that the good readers of Amazon have been so generous as to point out. He makes a staggeringly quick recovery. He was poisoned, so he wasn't actually deathly ill. I was just saying that, I guess. So he was maliciously, deliberately poisoned. So once he recovered from the poison, he exacts some violent revenge, and then they go to Philadelphia. They're trying to find a cure for... Naomi has the disease. I didn't even mention that, but the teasers. That's kind of a giveaway, actually. It does say it on the copy of the book, but it's kind of a plot giveaway. I don't know how I felt about that. Yeah, that's a great observation. She's referring to there's actually two parts that I think are relevant to what she's talking about. There's a line about the boarded up windows in Brooklyn. Boarded up windows used to indicate abandonment, now they indicate life. And then there's the soft is stronger than hard, right? The sort of this idea that, we do have this idea that our social structures, our infrastructure, our cities, these are the new permanents, right? A building is a new mountain, right? But these are things, these are man-made things, right? These are the sort of rectangles that we produce. I mean, that's how you know that man has touched nature, is that they leave a rectangle there somewhere. Rectangles don't exist in nature. So this is sort of an exercise. Nature is kind of reclaiming itself from so that the city becomes a kind of mulch, and then the next life starts to spring. So yeah, there is a sort of exercise in paradoxes. Trying to take notions that we take for granted and then flip them. Another thing I read a lot of was histories. Because I think the world, right, that the future is going to look a lot like the past, no matter what. Whatever we come up with for how the future is going to be totally different than anything we've ever seen, I guarantee you there is a thread of history. There will be, something will be utterly familiar about where we're going. And I felt the fall of society would probably look like what predated society. So I looked for periods of times like the Mongolian conquest for ideas. I looked when the Vikings were trying to take England from the Saxons. Sort of moments like this in history, I felt when we stripped down, they would look something like this. Yeah, no, I'm definitely not as deviously brilliant as Philip K. Dick. So he's referring to, in case you haven't read it, so there's do androids dream of electric sheep? I guess I'll summarize. There's artificial life, and the natural world is dying. So humanity is actively taking care of animals. It's by law you have to take care of an animal because we're trying to keep the species of animals going. And the hero is so broke that he can only afford an electric sheep. So he has this electric sheep, and it looks real, but it's not real. He knows it. He's ashamed of it, and he longs for a real sheep, which I always thought was so this interesting conception of humanity, that we will miss it so deeply that we will create little electric versions of our animals and take care of them. So the test for how you identify a human and an android is called the Voight-Kampff empathy test. Basically, androids are not capable of empathy, right? But human beings are. So you're asked a series of questions, and they check your, pupil dilate, whatever, and they can identify you as not being, as being an android, and therefore you're, a candidate for instant retirement. The question was about, so what's the role of empathy here is really, empathy is what makes us different from synthetic life. And empathy in my book is it does play an interesting role, because my book, it comes down to a very kind of brutal survival question, which is, what is your ultimate moral responsibility? Is it to the ideals of your society, or is it to the human being that you brought into the world? So in that paradigm, in some ways, empathy could be seen as our Darwinian weakness. That in fact there is a moment in the book where the hero's empathy causes a major problem for him. I think it is a little different. I think, I don't know if that, I'm trying to, I think, pose the question is there a moral imperative to survival? We typically associate survival as something selfish. But is it selfish? Or, or is it, I don't know. And I just ask the questions, I try not to answer them.